Hello, everyone, and welcome to iCriticLIVE. This is the podcast where we talk about entertainment, pop culture, and life in between. I'm your host, Kevin T. Rodriguez, film critic of iCritic.net, and thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time here with me today. And before we get into the main topic, I do want to bring some attention to the fact that I do write print reviews for www.icritic.net. You have to put the www before the website. I don't know why. I've been trying to work on that for years. Maybe one of these days I will figure it out. But I do have reviews for a lot of big and in some cases divisive movies. Of course the printer decides to go off right then and there. Why does it do that? Well, this is what it's called live. So anyway, I do have a review for Joker Folie à Deux, the absolute box office disaster. This was supposed to be one of the big things that came out this year, and now it's going to lose Warner Brothers a lot of money. And one of the things that came up about this movie is that it was not screen tested for audiences. Now, I personally do not believe in screen testing. For the record, I have participated in screen testings, and I have written good comments, but the people running the testing, they always strike me as so dumb. They ask you questions like, what could you do to make the main character more likable? Well, I don't think the main character is supposed to be likable. Well, but if you could make him more likable, what would you do? And there's a reason that creatives don't like these things, and you start second guessing yourself with testing and things like that. And I don't know, maybe screen testing would have worked in this case, but the thing is, there are some movies that absolutely failed in screen testing that went on to become beloved hits. Like, there's famous stories where, screen testing of Pulp Fiction, many audiences were like, it's too violent, it's too extreme, and thankfully, the monster that is Harvey Weinstein basically let Tarantino keep the film as is, but that's what these screen testings do. If you want to read my print review, though, I actually liked it more than most people did, and I'm not going to go over why, because I want to drive people to my site somehow, but needless to say, I'm definitely disappointed that Joker Folie à Deux is doing worse than it should be. I am, however, very happy to see that The Wild Robot, which spoiler, I gave 4.5 stars and is one of the best films of the year. I am so glad to see that hanging in now. Will it continue to hang in with a digital release date dropping on the 15th, which might be tomorrow if this has been scheduled properly? I guess we're going to wait and see. Personally, I don't get it. If you see a movie hanging on tight and actually growing more with word of mouth, I don't know why you would put it on premium video on demand. Maybe it's a topic for another day, but maybe theaters should start pushing back on that a little bit. We are out of COVID, and, if Inside Out 2 has proven anything, longer theatrical windows does help the box office. However, we're not here to talk about any of that today. We're here to talk about Greta Gerwig and the controversies revolving her involvement with the Chronicles of Narnia. Now, I'm going to stay up front. I love Greta Gerwig as a director. I love Lady Bird. I actually really liked Barbie. I did like Barbie. And I think Gerwig has a great future as a director. She was even a pretty good actress. I liked her in Frances Ha. Now, I did not like Little Women very much, primarily because of the way it was edited. I don't like the fact that they were showing things that happened at the end of the story at the beginning, thus spoiling some things that were going to happen and thus removing a lot of conflict. I don't know why it was edited the way it was, but if it was edited where all the stuff happened chronologically, I bet you I would have liked the Little Women movie as well. When she signed on to do the Chronicles of Narnia, I was like, okay, I've got mixed feelings about this. I do like her as a director, but I will say the Chronicles of Narnia is a very Christian-themed franchise, and I don't think Greta Gerwig is especially religious. So we're going to have to see if, the themes of the book are maintained. Some people might say, why wouldn't she maintain the themes? Well, they wouldn't maintain the themes in The Golden Compass, at least the movie, or they tried to dance around them. They would seem even more likely to do that here. But who knows? Maybe it's going to be a good movie. I don't know yet. I haven't seen it, and I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. But there are stories coming out that the project may be in trouble, at least with Greta Gerwig, because Gerwig wants a theatrical release for these movies. But here's the problem. The movies are being made by Netflix, and even though reports are going on that she has had some rational and, cordial discussions with Netflix officials, they do not seem willing to budge on the theatrical aspect. Now, I'm going to read from this article from Screen Rant written by Sarah Hurtado Rodriguez, because Screen Rant's typically a pretty good site. And the title of this article is Narnia Remake's lack of theater release under Netflix has become an issue for Greta Gerwig. Now, here's what the article says. Netflix's decision to prioritize streaming over theatrical releases is raising concerns for Greta Gerwig's highly anticipated take on the Chronicles of Narnia. Following the success of the early 2000 movie series, Gerwig signed on to write and direct at least 2 of the latest adaptations of C.S. Lewis's popular fantasy series, which follows the Pevensie siblings as they explore the magical kingdom of Narnia and confront themes of good versus evil. According to Matthew Baloney's newsletter, What I'm Hearing, Gerwig, who is known for the beautiful and visually immersive aspects of her films like Barbie and Little Women, and this is put in bold right here, would prefer a theatrical release to fully capture the scope and beauty of C.S. Lewis's beloved Chronicles of Narnia universe. However, Netflix has shown no signs of veering from their streaming first strategy, something they've encountered with other prior filmmakers, including Rian Johnson with the Knives Out movies. Baloney's report does note that the discussions between Gerwig and Netflix have thus far been amicable about her concerns, even though, quote, she's clearly bummed, unquote. What this means for the new Narnia adaptation, the article continues, without a theatrical release, Gerwig's Chronicles of Narnia runs the risk of not only losing the immersive experience that fantasy films typically thrive on in cinemas, but also missing out on box office earnings, which plays a significant role in determining a franchise's viability and long-term potential. This is particularly important given that Netflix is known for measuring success based on viewership data rather than the financial returns, a model that might not be the best approach for a massive franchise like Narnia. As demonstrated by Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery, Netflix has previously dabbled in limited releases, although that film is the exception rather than the rule. For Gerwig, however, the absence of a big screen release could potentially limit her vision, especially when looking at her previous film, Barbie, which became a cultural phenomenon and the highest grossing film of 2023 with $1.446 billion. It is still unclear if Netflix will reconsider a theatrical release for Narnia, but the platform's focus on streaming is already raising questions about how the project will be received. Meanwhile, industry insiders speculate about the financial ramifications because if Gerwig's Narnia films don't generate enough buzz through streaming alone, it could hinder Netflix's plans to develop future installments of the series. There have been no concrete plans for the future, but given that there are 7 books in the Lewis novel series, it seems likely the streamer will seek to adapt them all, though this will hinge on the costs of producing them. Now, there is a our take on Gerwig's Narnia concerns, but I'm going to leave that for the article. If you want to read the rest of the article, it's on Screen Rant and it's titled Narnia Remake's Lack of Theater Release Under Netflix Has Become an Issue for Greta Gerwig. And again, it was written by Sarah Hurtado Rodriguez. I always love to see Rodriguez is succeeding. So thank you, Sarah. This is a good article. Now, here's what I am going to say about this situation. And for the record, I do not know how true it is that Gerwig is bummed that there's not going to be a theatrical release for the Narnia films. I don't know how much this affects her wanting to direct the Narnia movies. I don't know any of that. I wasn't in the room. I didn't sign the contract. But I am going to, and I'm going to say this with the caveat that I do agree that these movies should be in theaters. I remember seeing the first 3 Chronicles of Narnia movies in theaters. The third one was in 3D. And they were all great theatrical experiences. 1 and 3 were the better of the films. 2, the Prince Caspian one, that maybe wasn't quite as good as it could have been. But they were great on the big screen. And I even saw the Chronicles of Narnia at a midnight screening, and it just felt like something new had been born. And then Disney continued to mess up the franchise because they didn't understand the books. Fox actually did a much better job with the third movie, but by then, the damage had been done. So with that caveat, I'm going to say this. Greta Gerwig has no business complaining about this movie not being theatrical. Like, this is time for some tough love, folks. This is time for some honesty. I'm going to state it right now. The fact that Netflix does not want to release these movies in theaters should not be a surprise. This is not news. Netflix has made it very clear they have no interest in theatrical. Not only have they never fully embraced theatrical, not only do they do things that purposefully undermine their own theatrical releases of films, but the guy who ran the theatrical division at Netflix, who was there to, expand the theatrical footprint for Netflix, he left because the guy who's running Netflix now, Ted Sarandos, basically told him there was no future in theatrical. Like, what do you say to a company when the founder, which was Reed Hastings, is asked about the huge box office success of the 1 week theatrical run of Glass Onion, and his response is basically, yeah, I know we're leaving millions of dollars on the table by doing that sort of a run, but Netflix's model is different. Now, I know that they have a different model. I know they're the streaming first company, but the thing is, all these other companies have streaming services now, and they're still putting their movies out theatrically and on physical media, and they're just making more and more money. It has been proven by studies that movies that have theatrical runs do lead to bigger streaming successes. And of course, there's the fact that it doesn't matter what you make in theaters. If you spent anything at all and it brings in any bit of money, that is gravy if you're making it for the streaming service. Now, we saw Apple dabble into theatrical, and basically because the box office failed, they're pivoting because they don't want the embarrassment of the articles being written about their box office failures. But here's the bottom line. Netflix has always been 100% upfront about they are a streaming first company. That's why filmmakers who really care about the theatrical experience, they either A, force Netflix to put in the contract that there will be a theatrical release of some kind, or they don't make that movie for Netflix. And here's where I'm getting a little annoyed by filmmakers when it comes to Netflix. I understand they're moaning and complaining about how they're making these movies with theaters in mind, but then Netflix puts them straight on streaming, and I get that that's a frustration. But at this point, you know what Netflix is about. Like, David Fincher has made a few movies for Netflix. Every single time he says, I would prefer you see this movie in theaters. His last movie, The Killer, probably would have done great in theaters. Mank probably would have done decent business in theaters. But he's working with Netflix, and he knows that they're not going to put him in theaters, or at least they're not going to put him in theaters outside of the Bay Theater that they own in Santa Monica, which, for the record, is where I see Netflix movies when I want to see them in theaters. You might actually see me sometime there. I'm usually the only one there because nobody really knows that Netflix owns that theater, or they're like, well, why would I pay to see this movie in theaters? It's going to come on Netflix in a couple weeks. Anyway, these filmmakers know this. That's why when Martin Scorsese made The Irishman for Netflix, he demanded a theatrical release, and Netflix put it out in a few theaters. They rented a Broadway stage in New York to show it on this really giant screen, and they had a 45-day exclusive window. Same thing was Knives Out. Now, I don't know if Knives Out had it written in the contract, but they at least made that exception for Rian Johnson. But there's a reason Christopher Nolan did not go to Netflix with the movie. I'm sure Netflix offered Christopher Nolan more money for Oppenheimer than Universal. But Universal guaranteed him a 120-day theatrical window. That is huge to Christopher Nolan. And the thing is, Greta Gerwig should be able to write her own check for her next movie. I'm not saying that means she should self-finance, or that's what I'm talking about. But after the huge success of Barbie, she pretty much has carte blanche to not only pick whatever project she wants to make, but she can set some of the terms because she made that much money. If the theatrical window was so important to Greta Gerwig, she should have, when Netflix approached her about saying it, okay, I will do this, but you are going to give this a theatrical release. And it's not going to be 1 week, it's not going to be 2 weeks, it's going to be a whole 90-day window, and it's going to play in more than 2,000 screens, across the nation. She could have demanded that be a condition of her signing on to the movie. And she didn't. I'm sure Netflix offered her a lot of money, and like filmmakers of the past, she accepted that money, and now she's complaining about the theatrical release. And here's the thing. I, again, agree with her. I think it's stupid that Netflix still has not embraced theatrical. I think it's especially dumb when you have a Greta Gerwig Chronicles of Narnia movie being made. Like, why wouldn't you put that in theaters? Why wouldn't you? I mean, that's got to make at least $50 million, offset some of those costs. It would probably make $100 or $200 million. I think people still like Narnia, and they want it to come back. And if they find out that Greta Gerwig directed it, I can guarantee you they would want to see that on like an IMAX screen or something like that. The fact that Netflix continues not to do this is frustrating. In fact, I'm even going to share a story, because Netflix had like a one-night screening at the TLC IMAX for Maestro, which was the Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan movie, which was nominated for Best Picture that nobody remembers anymore. Now, I like the movie. I was never going to give it Best Picture personally, but I like the movie. And they put it in IMAX. And by the way, one thing that was especially great about this movie was filmed in the 1.33 aspect ratio, so it pretty much filled the entire IMAX screen. And the visuals and the music, these were tailor-made for the theaters. And then I found out it came to a local theater, and I took my parents to see it because I knew they would like it. So I actually got to see this Netflix movie twice in theaters, and both times it was significantly better in theaters than it was streaming it at home. And I also saw Roma in theaters and The Irishman in theaters. These are movies that are enhanced by theaters, and the fact that Netflix won't actually embrace the theaters is frustrating. And so I agree with that. But here's the thing, Greta, here's the thing, David, here's the thing, everyone who takes Netflix's paychecks. You are dealing with a company run by a man who actually had the galls to say that Barbenheimer would have been just as big if it had premiered on Netflix first. Yeah, maybe it would have been just as big. It just would have been without, as Mr. Krabs would say, the money. It would be just as big without the money. But that's the company you're dealing with. This is Ted Sarandos' thing. And so, if you are going to work with Netflix, you need to actually put it in your contract that there will be a theatrical release, and a real one. You might even have to tell them how long it should be in theaters and how many screens it's going to be on, because Netflix is not going to take your concern seriously. Once you decide to make a movie from them, you are making content for them, for their platform. They are not in this for the movie business. They just want content. And so while I agree with the artists wanting their movies seen in theaters, I'm getting really tired of hearing them complain that they're making this great movie for Netflix, and Netflix doesn't want to release it in theaters. You know what they're like. You know what their position is. If you want it to be released in theaters, put it in the contract, and if they won't, don't make movies for Netflix. In fact, now that all these other companies have streaming services and are trying to build their streaming portfolio, take the movie somewhere else and say, yeah, this can be for your streaming platform, but it has to have a theatrical release first. I bet you NBC, Universal, Comcast will agree to those terms. Disney will probably agree to those terms. Warner Brothers will agree to those terms. Heck, Shudder and Mubi have shown they are primarily streaming services. Mubi's a curated independent film streaming site, and Shudder is a horror site. They have picked up movies and put them in theaters exclusively for 60 to 90 days purely to advertise their streaming service. That it's come like, hey, if you like this movie, subscribe to this streaming service because that's where it's going to be in a few months. So there are streaming services who will do theatrical. And I think if enough filmmakers start basically shunning Netflix and saying, you know what, we are not signing that dotted line until you guarantee theatrical, Netflix is just going to keep doing this. And if they keep doing it because you don't force their hands to do it, you have no one to blame but yourself. So, again, just make it clear. Love Greta, love her works, but she is beyond naive and really not paying attention if she's honestly surprised at this point that Netflix is considering taking her $100 million Narnia film that could be a box office hit and dumping it straight to Netflix. If she is honestly surprised by this, I've got some property to sell her real cheap. Anyway, that's going to be the end of this episode. What do you think? Do you think Greta is naive? Do you think there's like maybe an argument that she should be genuinely surprised that Netflix doesn't want to put her movies in theaters? If you're listening to this podcast on a place with comments, I would love to know, so comment below. Otherwise, if you like what you hear and this is your first time here, let's make it official. Subscribe. We're on Spotify, Apple, Deezer, all the places where you can find podcasts. And I will see you at the movies. Take care. Hey, you made it to the end. Thank you so much for making it to the end. Just a few more things. First of all, the names that you see on the screen, these are our Patreon and YouTube member supporters. And I thank each and every one of them. Their support helps me make exclusive videos for Patreon and YouTube members, as well as keep the channel running. And of course, is just of huge kindness to me. Also, don't forget to check out the iCriticLIVE podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, Deezer, whatever podcasting service you listen to. It is there. We definitely want to see you there. And hey, there's also other videos that you can check out. So, check out these other channels, these other videos, especially that one. I think that's a really good one.